Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Dennis Riley, the Vice President of Federal at Gigamon. Now, Dennis, we were talking a lot about CDM in that first segment, and I want to kind of continue down that path, but in a broader way. I cannot go to a conference these days without hearing two things. One is 5G, which we're not going to talk about today, and I'm glad. The other one we're talking that I hear a lot about is zero trust networking. And I think that does play actually a big role because CDM, from what I've heard, is a big piece of the zero trust framework. Because zero trust, as you know, is not a technology, it's not a new initiative, but it's a framework. So maybe connect the dots for me, CDM and zero trust, how they fit together.
Sure. So with zero trust, obviously you want to verify everything on your network. There's a strong emphasis on ID and credential management and microsegmentation, so that if there is a breach, you can contain it quickly. But underlying all of that, you still have to have visibility into your data, whether it's data at rest or data in motion. So assuming that there will eventually be a breach, and assuming a borderless network where there's going to be more and more connected devices, whether it's IoT or handhelds, you need to be able to see what's happening on the network so you can get a quick indicator of a compromise. You can quickly respond, contain and recover.
And I think that's a key point, is see what's on your network and quickly move and fix it. And I think one of the things that agencies have maybe struggled with over the years is that inability to quickly move and recover from it. We have a problem. Okay, well, what's the problem? Where's the problem? But why is that part of zero trust, though? Because part of zero trust to me has always been, we used to call it roles and responsibilities, back-end attribute exchange, whatever.
Right, you're right. So you want to give limited access, so the least amount of access to a person based on their credentials. But again, you have to assume even with that, and the famous OPM breach, credentials were stolen, right? So even with that, you're going to have incidents and you're going to have breaches. So you need to be able to set up these microsegmentations so that if there is a breach, it can't propagate laterally. But if the adversary figures out a way to propagate laterally, you want to be able to see that so you can detect, respond, and recover. And that's where visibility of that traffic in motion through a next generation packet broker becomes critical. And
that was actually the first time the OPM breached, when I kind of learned really what it meant to be, network hopping. They get in through a network that nobody really cares about, but then there's a way to hop to the more sensitive data, and if you had microsegmentation, it would say that, Dennis Riley has access to this network, but not to that one, so therefore we're stopping you.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yes, you'd have barriers set up so that even if there were a breach, it would be contained.
Right. We hear a lot about zero networking. CDM fits in because, of course, identify what's on your network, who's on your network, and how the data is moving. That's one piece to the zero networking. Are there other pieces that you guys are starting to see agencies talk to, or at least interested in, to create that zero trust framework?
Well, phase 2 was identity management, so that's well underway. And now with Defend, there's more emphasis on cloud and the proliferation of additional devices, which increases the attack surface through IoT, mobile and handheld devices. So you'll still want to have that strong credential management and still want to have the visibility, assuming that there's going to be a breach.
Yeah, and we all can assume there will be one eventually. Right. Let's move off of CDM and move off of zero trust and maybe step back and look at the broader perspective. There's always a ton going on when it comes to cybersecurity. And in the DoD world, in the Defense Department intelligence community world, there's an interesting move. There was a Navy report that came out recently about the state of cybersecurity there, and I had a great conversation around supply chain, and basically the Navy said under that, we can't assure anything on our supply chain right now. We need to do a better job. But there's even more to that. Give me the sense of, we focus on civilian agencies. What about the Defense Department world? They seem to always get a better credit for dealing with cybersecurity, but they're under a lot more pressure than maybe some of the civilian agencies.
They are. So, our nation-state adversaries certainly have targeted with a lot of success in the past our DoD networks. And you mentioned the Secretary of the Navy Readiness Review that came out earlier this year. They were very frank about, since 2015, one estimate had $1.5 trillion in economic theft and espionage, and many think that that's very understated. In fact, Secretary of the Navy went on to say that the amount of military readiness that nation states like the Chinese have gained through those tactics is immeasurable. So that's very disconcerting. Fortunately, with U.S. Cybercom and other initiatives by the services, we're starting to see more focus on defensive cyber operations and cyber protection teams. It was interesting to hear earlier this year, and it's quoted in that Secretary of the Navy report, the Commandant of the Marine Corps say, are we in a cyber war? He said, yeah, I think we've been in one for about a decade. What he did not say, but what was implied was, for a long time, we weren't fighting it. Only the bad guys were fighting that cyber war. So now I think there's reports where we're taking more offensive operations, but the emphasis is on defensive cyber operations. And a lot of the same principles with CDM apply to DoD. Know what's happening on your network, see the network traffic no matter where it is so that you can properly defend it.
I think one of the comments you just made is really stark. You mentioned it's one of the most frank readiness reviews by a service about their state of cybersecurity. I want to go back to, I want to say 2006, 2005, when the first time DoD talked about one of their hacking operations, Titan Rain, I think, if I remember correctly. And we were all taken aback by that discussion. I think almost this readiness review almost rises to that, because that was the first time that they've been that frank. Did that surprise you about how that readiness review when you read through it?
I thought it was very candid. I was surprised, but I thought it was appropriate because, we need a wake-up call, I think, and we'd rather have a written report be the wake-up call than something more serious.
If opium just wasn't enough, by the way, right, as a wake-up call, or so many other breaches. But yeah, I think sometimes you need it.
But I think it's a wake-up call to the public, to the Congress, and to the administration to more robustly fund these programs and spend those dollars wisely on the force-multiplying technologies that we're talking about today.
When you talk about defensive operations, and I think break and inspect is one example of that, are you seeing DoD, again, similar path to CDM? I know they don't use CDM because it's for civilian agencies, or are they doing something different that the civilian agencies maybe will catch up with in another year or two? A lot of times I like to make if it starts in DoD, the civilian agencies catch up a little bit later.
I think both DoD and civilian are doing similar things in slightly different ways. You have civilian agencies doing things through their individual budgets and initiatives. They get that booster shot through CDM, through DHS. On the DoD side, the National Security Agency and U.S. Cybercom take some initiatives, but the individual services are acting as well. A good example of that is the individual services setting up their own cyber defense operations and also cyber protection teams. These are teams that can deploy, through to do either readiness reviews or in response to an incident to help out commands who may not have quite as much capability to make sure that the networks are secure, or if there's been a breach, to isolate it and remediate.
And DHS is asking for a fair amount of money in 2020 budget, and I think they've asked for it before, to do more red teaming and blue teaming and to do more architecture reviews. Are you seeing very similar in DoD, meaning that they've started to do, there's a program called DoD CAR, Cyber Architecture Review.
Yes.
There's a GovCAR that developed from it. That's what I mean. Sometimes things start in DoD and move to the civilian. Is DoD, they've set up these cyber teams, these defensive teams, and to respond to incidents and readiness, but are they looking to do more of those?
So they have red teams and blue teams. Red teams mimicking the adversary, and they also have inspection teams, cyber review teams that'll go out to do inspections so that we can find it before the adversary does. And then they've got what I'll call rapid response teams. DHS has that as well, where if there is an incident and a subordinate command maybe doesn't have quite the resources to handle it, they can get help from higher authority, like the
U.S. Cyber Command
US,
or NSA maybe
yes,
they jump
exactly.
in. Yeah, I think you see a lot of that sharing starting to happen, and that interagency, meaning across the DoD, the Army is helping the Air Force and vice versa. The other piece of this that I think we should bring up when it comes to DoD is that DoD is obviously making a very strong move to the cloud. You're seeing multiple different programs, whether it's the four-letter word called, we don't want to mention JEDI, that gets a lot of attention, or the DOS project, or even the Air Force and the Army both going down the path of enterprise IT as a service. How does the cybersecurity piece fit into all those? Because again, we talked about this a little bit earlier about the shared responsibility.
Yeah, so there's shared responsibility where the agency is still responsible for the data and the applications in the cloud. One thing that isn't said very often, but it shows up periodically in surveys, is one of the reasons why there hasn't been a greater shift to applications to the cloud, because cloud first came out now about 8 years ago. And recent GAO survey was a sample of agencies, showed that only about 11% had shifted to the cloud. But agencies have been a little bit reluctant because they're not that confident in the security of their data in the cloud. A big reason is they can't see it. They feel better and actually have better visibility into their data at rest and data in motion when it's on premise. But once it goes out to the cloud, they lack that. But there are now technologies coming onto the marketplace, and Gigamon has one, to allow those agencies to see their data in the cloud so that they can see it, secure it, and manage it, which is key. So I think that will help them feel more comfortable shifting greater workloads to the cloud.
I think that's a key point. If you can hug your data, if you will, maybe not, maybe not literally, but at least figuratively, I think you get a little more comfortability with it. Dennis, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're just about out of time. Where is cybersecurity heading? And again, if we have this conversation again a year from now and 5 years from now, what are some of those technologies? What are some of those trends that you're starting to see emerge in the public sector or the federal sector, or even maybe you see it from some of your commercial counterparts that you think will bleed into the government?
Yeah, sure. So there's been a lot of talk, of course, about machine learning and AI. So I think we'll see more and more of that. But the biggest trend is that private sector as well as government needs to modernize. They need to have digital transformation to provide better services to the citizens. So they've got to do that at a high level, but they also have to do it securely. But there's only limited budget to go around. So you'll want to invest in things like next generation packet brokers, be able to see your encrypted data so that you can see what's happening and secure it, and do it so that performance is not affected, because you want to have a high performance and a secure service to your citizens and other customers of government.
The AI piece, the machine learning piece, there's a lot of excitement about it, but I'm not sure it's quite there yet. I think what's more in the short term is, I think, automation. How do you automate some of those security checks? Do you see, how far away are we really from having true AI? Do you get a sense?
Well, on the automation piece, we're definitely seeing that now. And of course, it's key with personnel shortages that you automate the more routine tasks so that the higher order actions that require more human intervention get reserved for our scarce human resources. So we're seeing more automation. AI, machine learning will help. But again, underlying it all, you got to be able to see what's happening on your network, know who's on your network, so that you can keep it secured while it's operating at a high level.
Comes back around to CDM, doesn't it?
CDM is an important piece of that.
Important piece of that, very nice. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Let me thank my guest, Dennis Riley, the Vice President of Federal at Gigamon. Dennis, thank you so much for taking the time.
Jason, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
I've been your host, Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.